entrenched or something, it makes it really easy to create startups and compete. But we're talking about obviously currencies rather than businesses. Um, and so, and so now back to the question of why is it that the core team is not planning to deploy any RTokens ourselves? Well, I want to make it completely clear to the entire community that you can do it. That you can deploy RTokens. That's the whole point. And if when you come in, let's say you've never heard about Reserve. Let's say you're out there in the world right now, you don't know anything about Reserve. Let's say a year from now, you learn about Reserve and you're learning the first like 5 facts about Reserve, or the first 10 facts about Reserve. And one of the facts you learn is that the project that initially deployed the protocol has never actually deployed any RTokens. Well, that makes it immediately clear to you they must have been deployed by someone else. And so it's a quick way for you to come to understand, like, oh, okay, this is a thing that I could do, or at least that people other than the creators can do. This is some sort of permissionless system. And so I believe it's going to be a useful fact for helping not only the people on this call, but the community as it grows. As we pick up many other people out there, understanding that that anyone can do it. So those are the 2 reasons why we are not planning to deploy any RTokens ourselves. And I am being careful when I say we're not planning to. It's like maybe we would decide to at some point for some reason. If for some reason there's something that we thought really made sense, and for some reason no one else thought it made sense, maybe we would someday. But it's not the plan. It's definitely not the plan at the beginning, and it's really not the plan to ever do that. I think it's best if we never end up doing it. But who knows? All right. Next thing I want to talk about ultimate. Oh, did Thomas or Nancy, you have a comment on that?
Nope. Keep going.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm going to talk about 3 more things. Ultimate goal of RTokens, briefly, just a refresher. A little bit about the flexibility of RTokens, and then quickly, what is a target unit? Thomas, you might maybe talk about those details a little bit more if you want to. So just a reminder, the ultimate goal, like the reason why we created the protocol, in terms of long-term vision, is that we think that over the course of time, more and more financial assets, ordinary financial assets like equities, bonds, and so on, will end up being tokenized. And we think that a good way for people to hold, to store their value and to even transact on a day-to-day basis, in theory at least, would be with a super diversified basket of assets as what is storing their wealth. And I think an intuition pump for this is that, at least for storing value, this is what wealthy people already do, right? If you talk to any wealthy person, they don't have a lot of money in cash. They just have enough money in cash to do the transactions they want to do in the short term, because everyone knows that fiat currency loses value. And so, and this is obviously more true today. People are more worried about inflation, but even, if you go back a few years to before anyone in the US at least was worried about inflation, it's still the case that anyone who has a significant amount of wealth wouldn't keep much of that in cash, right? You would keep it in a diversified basket of assets, stocks and bonds and maybe some other assets, maybe real estate, for example. And so we think that in the long term, the Reserve protocol could be used, and this is premise on those assets becoming tokenized, which may not come to pass. We don't know if that's going to happen. That's sort of up to the world and the market to do. But assuming that happens, we think it would be really awesome if you could have a way of creating those super diversified baskets and governing them in a decentralized way, so that they're not governed by like a single tech company or a single government or something like that. Rather, they're governed by some process that is birthed by this community, and that has some desirable features, and that would make it predictable, and hopefully as politically neutral as it possibly can be. I don't think anything can ever be fully neutral, but hopefully more neutral than a single country or a single tech company. So we see some possible RTokens that could be created right away. Thomas is going to share some ideas that we've been kicking around internally. And we think there's cool stuff that you can do with the protocol from the very beginning. But I do personally think that some of the coolest stuff that can be done is actually pretty far in the future because we have to wait for that tokenization to occur. And I don't know how long that will take. And again, there's a chance that it won't happen. But that's the bet that we're making. And we think that if all of that happens, this could be the optimal way for the world to approach money in the future. And the complete full success scenario for this overall endeavor would be that over the course of many decades, you would end up seeing essentially the primary world reserve currency being something that is deployed with this protocol that consists of a super diversified basket of assets that is well chosen and well governed, and that anyone can hold as a form of money and not worry about inflation, because it's not governed by a central bank that has competing mandates, and so on, which that's a longer conversation, but that's kind of what tends to deterministically lead to inflation in fiat currencies. So that's the ultimate goal. Looking at a couple of details of RTokens, a couple of things that I find interesting about the way that we've decided to do this. So one thing is just to note that the RToken protocol, or the reserve protocol, I should say, is very flexible by nature. So obviously anyone can create an RToken with any basket, but also when you create an RToken, you get to specify the address, the Ethereum address that governs that RToken. Excuse me. And so when you do that, you could create an RToken and just have it be governed by like your own, Ethereum address. You could just have that address on a hardware wallet or whatever, and you could just be the dictator of that RToken. Now that might have legal implications. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea, but you could do it. But similarly, you can specify any smart contract address. And so basically any arbitrary DAO structure that you can dream up and implement in a smart contract can be used to govern an RToken. And so, we will be encouraging, I should say, excuse me, and we will be supporting the use of a pretty simple token voting procedure that has become relatively common in the DeFi Ethereum world, of basically one token, one vote, using staked RSR tokens. That's something that we're writing the basic adapters for people to use that if they want when they deploy RTokens. But you can tweak that. You can tweak it a little bit. You could write something completely new. You could lead a discussion on a forum for 6 months, talking about a new way of doing something, and then apply for a grant or use your own money to pay developers to write that smart contract. It's a very open system in terms of the governance possibilities. But there's another way in which the protocol is quite flexible, and an RToken is quite flexible, and that's just that if you think about it, being able to make a basket of any ERC20 tokens on Ethereum means that it's very flexible what backs an RToken, right? So in particular, I probably should have written down an example for this. Let me see if I can explain this clearly. Let's say that there's some new DeFi protocol where you can go deposit capital and it does some new fancy thing with that capital. I don't know, it pools it together with lots of other capital and it creates some derivative or something. It's like some novel financial contract that you find interesting, that has some interesting financial property. Now, even if that, so first off, that DeFi protocol likely will tokenize its own positions. So probably you can deposit your capital and you'll get some token that represents your ownership position. And then that token itself could be put in an RToken basket. But even if it doesn't, you could write a smart contract that would deposit its capital in that protocol and issue a token that represents that balance, that would allow whoever is the holder of that token to be the one to withdraw the capital from that protocol. So even if DeFi protocols don't tokenize their balances natively, anyone can write a wrapper smart contract essentially to tokenize those balances. And that means that basically any financial instrument or position that exists on Ethereum can be tokenized and can be included in an RToken's backing. And so that really does open it up to quite a lot of creativity for what an R token can be backed by. And I think I think you'll see over the next maybe 6 months as we end up, discussing this on this Discord and on the forum and so on. I think people will start to have like pretty interesting ideas. Some of them will probably be like scary ideas of like, oh man, that starts to get kind of tenuous once you have like different layers upon layers or something. Like you can do weird things, and so some R tokens might be unsafe, but some ideas might be really really sound and really interesting. And so like the things that Thomas is going to share today, these are just interesting starting ideas. But there's actually quite a lot of innovation that I think we could see happening because of how flexible the RToken protocol is. And lastly, I just want to introduce one new concept that I think we haven't really talked about much before, but that it's an interesting concept to have in mind when thinking about R tokens yourself. And this is the concept of the target unit. And Taylor, please correct me if I used any of this terminology any differently from how you guys use it on the protocol team, because I don't want to be creating two different lexicons here. So a target unit basically refers to like if you have an asset in the basket for an R token protocol, that asset might be something that is pegged to something else. It could be pegged directly, like how USDC is pegged to the US dollar, or it could be pegged indirectly, like how CUSDC is kind of redeemable for USDC, which is then pegged to the US dollar. But in both cases, the underlying thing that's being referenced is the US dollar. And so for both USDC and CUSDC, the target unit would be the US dollar. Now, if you compare that to say, let's say you made an R token and part of the basket was just ETH. Well, then ETH itself would be the target unit because it's not referring to something else. It's not like ETH is pegged to the euro or something. ETH is just ETH. And so you can have a collateral asset that is its own target unit, but you can also have a collateral asset that is meant to represent some other currency or asset. It could be gold or the dollar or the euro, or like wrapped to Bitcoin, for example. Its target unit would be Bitcoin. And so the target unit comes into play when you're thinking about defaults and whether the asset that's in the basket has defaulted or not, because you're measuring the value of the asset in the basket relative to that target unit. And so you can think of, and so the interesting thing is you can have an R token that has all collateral assets with the same target unit, right? So you could have, I think the most common type of R token at the beginning will probably be US dollar denominated. And so you could have, 5 different coins that are all directly or indirectly pegged to the US dollar. And so the target unit for every single one of those collateral tokens would just be the US dollar. But you could also, imagine, say, an R token where the target unit for every collateral asset is Bitcoin. So you could have wrapped Bitcoin, and you could have Ren BTC, and maybe another Bitcoin derivative on Ethereum. You could have maybe like CWBTC, like from Compound, and all of those would have the target unit Bitcoin. But then you can also have R tokens that have multiple target units, right? So you could have an R token that has a combination of dollar-denominated tokens and Bitcoin-denominated tokens. And you can have an arbitrary number of these. So you could have, an R token that has 100 different target units of many different fiat currencies and, many different, publicly traded equity, units or something. So that's the idea of a target unit. And so as we begin as a community thinking about different possible R tokens, there's the question of like, well, which versions of tokenized dollars or tokenized euros or whatever are interesting. Some are yield bearing, some have different kinds of pegs, etc. But then there's also just the question of what sort of combination of target units would an R token holder be interested in? Would somebody want an R token that is 90% dollar denominated and 10% Bitcoin denominated? I don't know. Maybe they would, or maybe they wouldn't. But that's an interesting sort of dimension to think about when you're considering different possible R tokens. All right, so that's what I wanted to share as an introduction. And so, Thomas, why don't you take it away? And then, Taylor, if you have any thoughts to add, like as we go, or at the end, and or maybe in response to questions, then that'll be great too.
Yeah, definitely. Nevin, thanks for the intro. And Taylor, jump in here at any point with additional thoughts or clarifications. Um, I'm. It's been a really exciting last month and a half, I think it is now, which is kind of crazy. But it's been very exciting getting up to speed just because money is a very complicated thing, right? Uh, I feel like after after being a crypto hobbyist for the last 8 years, I've been hearing people talk about money. I think everyone here has probably heard people talk about money much more than the non-crypto enthusiast. It's just like a weird theoretical concept, and it's also really complicated. Money's complicated, currencies are complicated, and the team at Reserve has been thinking about these complexities and intricacies for quite a long time and trying to solve some of the problems that come up with creating new currencies in really interesting and novel ways. So I wanted to share. I'll be sharing a couple more things that I find interesting and exciting about the platform, and then we'll go through a couple potential RToken designs that we've been brainstorming on. Just another. Just to reiterate what Nevin was saying, these are just ideas, right? And we want to work with folks in the community and folks throughout the industry to figure out like what are the best types of RTokens. And even if they don't want to talk to us, they can just deploy their own RToken, right? It's the beauty of the permissionless platform that we're planning to launch soon. So a couple of things that I've found really exciting. Nevin touched on this a bit, but the flexibility for experimentation. If people don't like what's there, they can create their own. And we believe that, the market will really drive what is the most popular one. If there's something that people find more attractive, if there's one RToken that people find more attractive from a yield, from a risk perspective, et cetera, then anyone can go mint that, and anyone can go, buy that on a DEX or wherever it's available. And, over time, we expect that the ones that people find most interesting and most attractive will be the ones that get the highest market cap. And, I think Nevin shared a bit about this in the past, but, we expect, like many things, for there to be bigger winners. There will probably be a couple, like one or two maybe things that people find very attractive, and other ones won't grow as quickly. And it'll be really interesting to see that play out. Another thing that I've found very interesting about the platform in general is how the team is taken some of the features of traditional finance and thought about them really from like a first principles perspective, and tried to reinvent them through a decentralized lens. And so, I think one really good example of that is the insurance pools on, backing up the collateral. This isn't a perfect example by any means, but I do think that, traditionally people look at cash in their bank account, and they think like, oh, this entity is regulated. This entity, has like what's called like FDIC insurance or something like that. That's like a very interesting thing to them, and it's a good safe backstop. And I want to be I'm trying to be a little careful here because this is by no means the exact same thing. But one thing that's cool about the insurance pool model that RTokens have is that there's an element of backstop to their currency, and so like any amount of money that they have saved in this RToken, sitting in their wallet, wherever that wallet is. It could be a decentralized, it could be a normal Ethereum wallet. It could be that's on chain. It could also be in a centralized exchange. But any amount of this RToken that is out there will always have some portion of it insured by the insurance pool. That in the case of any default of the underlying collateral can be made up with. And they can be made whole to some extent by the insurance pool. And this is, like, to me, just like a very cool first principles approach to recreating some of the features in traditional finance in a way that makes sense in this permissionless, decentralized world. Another thing that I've found very interesting about the platform is the full transparency of the treasury or the collateral that's backing up this currency. It's all managed fully on chain. All the collateral actions will be managed. Decisions will be handled by governance, and actions will be handled fully and automatically on chain. And I think we've seen that has been very powerful and very helpful for some of the key DeFi protocols out there, right? Like Aave, Compound, Maker. These are protocols that have been able to handle, frankly, very crazy market conditions. I think I saw something yesterday that the Aave team has been investing quite a bit in the analytics and the transparency to display like what is going on in their platform, because they find that they want to that it's performing well and it's performing as expected and as documented, etc. And they want to really showcase that. And that's another thing that excites me about Reserve is it'll be very similar. Everything will be handled fully on chain, very transparently, and it'll be interesting and exciting to be able to create tools that showcase exactly what's going on under the hood, because it will be on chain, and we can do exactly that. Another thing that's before jumping into RTokens, another thing that's been exciting to me about the Reserve team, and actually broadly the entire team, is that it's just got this awesome mission of making crypto useful. I think for a long time in crypto in general, there's been a lot of promise about the future, without focusing like in the immediate now, like what problem is this solving for which person. And to me, this is I think the protocol, the platform rather, that we're getting ready to launch, and the company in general is very focused on how do we solve these problems for real people. And that's something that gets me super excited. All right, so before jumping into some of the example RTokens, a couple key features just to make sure that we're all on the same page about RTokens and how they work. So one thing is they are fully collateralized and fully redeemable, right? And so what does that mean? We've seen these types of stablecoins have been successful at staying pegged via market makers, because it's easy for them to do so, right? At any point, if there's any difference in price, anyone can buy the token and just go redeem it immediately for their underlying collateral. Assuming that there isn't anything that's going on where things might be paused or minting new ones, etc. And so that over time we expect that these will naturally be able to maintain their peg, and that's a big part of the design. The other big feature, just to make sure that we all fully understand it, is the insurance pool and the revenue generating collateral are two things that really tie together. And so by having these RTokens have some kind of revenue generating collateral, it enables us to take a portion of that revenue and give it to insurance providers or the RSR stakers, and incentivize them to do so. At the end of the day, that's like a very important market dynamic of the protocol that I think we in the community will be relying on as our tokens do grow. There needs to be a reason to stake your RSR as insurance, and there needs to be an incentive to do it. A big part of that is the revenue share from the collateral that's generating revenue for the entire art token. Nevin touched on this one a bit, but the collateral plugins are going to be something that's flexible. And so, what we're planning to launch with in the beginning is, Aave and Compound token integrations, or plugins as we've been referring to them, for stablecoins, but also for something like ETH, potentially something like wrapped Bitcoin, etc. But in the future, we're expecting that we can, or actually anyone can, write plugins for various different types of collateral, whether that's in the short term, it could be something like LP tokens from Curve, any other type of ERC20 yield bearing tokens, something from Balancer, There could even be interesting things where there's, one portion of the basket is volatile, and the other portion of the basket is like a hedged version of that volatile asset. There's a variety of interesting things that could be created and could be launched, and that RTokens could incorporate. But the key component there is the flexibility of the collateral plugins. Let's see. We talked about the insurance pool and the revenue split. One other thing to mention here is the just specifically that it is not a rebasing. RTokens will not be rebasing, and I actually think that that's very important to remember, and also quite valuable in a couple different ways. The constant value with no rebasing, means that the RTokens, as there is income for that RToken, the RToken itself will become a little bit more valuable, right? And so if it starts out when it's launched at $1, and there's a bit of yield for the RToken, a year later it will be worth and redeemable for more collateral. And so what does that actually mean? It means a couple things. It means, first of all, that there isn't any. It means that it's easily integratable with a variety of other things in DeFi. One thing that I think we've seen over the last year with a couple different protocols that had rebasing baked into it is that you can actually put them into AMMs, right? And so DEXs can't easily integrate with them until it's like a wrapped version. And I think that that's just like an extra step that creates a lot of complexity. And so, I'm excited that the token is going to be constant value, not rebasing, or sorry, not constant value, but it will be accruing value underneath the hood, and not passing that on in the form of rebasing, because it's easily integratable into DeFi AMMs and a variety of other DeFi platforms. So I think those are the main things I wanted to cover before jumping into a couple examples. But yeah, I want to take us through a couple examples. It'll be 3 different examples here. We've mentioned these in the RToken brainstorm channel, but wanted to just talk through them in a bit more depth. And again, these are ideas. These are by no means what we like want to be deployed or anything like that. These are just ideas of different types of RTokens that we think could be interesting to a variety of different consumer groups. Whether those consumer groups are folks in the RPay app or in other fintech apps who just want to fully collateralize yield-bearing insured stable currency. We think they might be attractive for a variety of different reasons to DAO treasuries who value liquidity on chain and want a safe yield, but really value preservation over the gain and the risky high yield. Another potential group that these might be valuable to is any businesses that want to give their customers interest, but don't want to be a bank in any way. So it's easy and quick to integrate for them to give their customers, some kind of wallet that can hold an ERC20 token for folks that might have cash balances, whether that's companies that serve merchants that have cash moving through their accounts or things like that. And it could be potentially an easy way to give them some kind of interest. Those are just some examples, but without any more delay, I'll take you through the 3 things that we've been thinking about. So the first one, so there's 3 here that we're going to go through. The first one is what we've been thinking of as what's called USD plus. The second one is USDC plus or DAI plus. And then a third one is something that we've been referring to as an insured tether. So for the first one, USD plus, this is like a DeFi version of RSV in many ways. And we'll be leveraging, first of all, if everyone doesn't know, the way that Aave and Compound work is that people can deposit money and supply it. And then on the other side, people can also borrow different types of tokens. And the borrowers pay interest. The people that supply tokens are paid interest. And so this is like a well-tested standard thing now. Aave and Compound have both grown to billions of dollars locked within their protocol. Tons of revenue is passed. The interest rates for both sides vary quite a bit. I think like right now they're a bit lower than they've been historically. At times they go quite a bit higher. But what's interesting is whenever you deposit collateral there, whether it's USDC, DAI, etc., you get in return what's called a C token or an A token. C for Compound, A for Aave. And with that token, you can you can always redeem it for the underlying collateral, but underneath the hood, it's being lent out to folks that are borrowing, and as a result, a portion of that interest from the borrowers that they're paying is being passed along to the depositors. And so, this is the first type of collateral that that we've really focused on, given how well we've seen Compound and Aave stand up over the years. These are the first protocols that we've integrated with for collateral plugins. And so for this first DeFi version of RSV, or what we've been referring to as USD Plus, there will be the Compound and Aave versions of the same basket of stablecoins, right? So we'd have CUSDC, AUSDC, CUSDP, AUSDP, CTUSD, and ATUSD. And those are the same ones that we have in the RSV basket right now. How might the revenue split work? It might be like 33% or a third to the staked RSR folks, and then like 2/3 or 66% to the RToken holders themselves. And so, like, what does that look like? Say for example, there's 3% APY on the collateral that's deposited in Aave and Compound, on average across those different stablecoins. 2% of that might go to the RToken, and 1% of that might go to the staked RSR. And so, just going down this example, highlighting that this is an example, and market rates will change this over time. If the RToken itself has a $100 million market cap, and there's 20 million staked of RSR staked in the insurance pool, then $2 million would, or 2% of the 100 million, would go to the RToken holders, which would look like 2% APY. And then $1 million of the income would go to the staked RSR pool, and so that would be around 5% APR for those for the insurance pool. And so you can see here that the insurance pool is being paid a bit of higher yield, which we think makes sense here, because the insurance pool is a little smaller, but they are taking on the risk, etc. And so why might people like this RToken? Again, it's a simple ERC20 that can be held in any type of wallet, whether that's on chain or on a centralized exchange. It's slowly accruing value over time. It's got very trusted collaterals that are fully backed by cash reserves in bank account somewhere. The Pax dollar, the Trust dollar, and Circle all hold cash or cash equivalents in very transparent manners. And so this would be a very safe version of that. The insurance might be, some of the risks that people might be, insurance again would be like smart contract risk, or DeFi lending risk if they're not fully comfortable with it. But at the same time, they've got this essentially, through a couple layers, fully cash-backed stable asset that is getting some yield and can be easily moved around DeFi in any of the manners that folks are used to moving around DeFi and centralized finance. So USD Plus is one of the first ones. It's very similar to RSV, but it's really enabled by the Reserve Protocol to have this yield bearing and insurance, which is exciting. I think I'll go through the other two, and then we can do questions at the end here. Does that make sense, Sinatra? All right, cool. I'm not looking at the general chat, so if there is anything to answer as I'm going through it, let me know. Awesome. All right, cool. So the second one is, something like a specific currency that's just DeFi enabled, right? And so this could be like USDC plus or even DAI plus. And what might that look like? The basket might be split, for USDC plus, it might be split between CUSDC and AUSDC. We might have a similar revenue split here between the insurance pool and the RToken holders, but this would enable an RToken to kind of like leverage the existing brand of some other strong brands in the industry, and places that are already widely known, widely trusted, etc., and be in a yield-bearing version that can be quickly, rather that through governance can adjust over time to other forms of yield, where these tokens might be able to gain that yield underneath. And it could start out with compounded Aave, but over time there might be other like single-sided staking of USDC somewhere that could be included in this basket as well. And so again, in this case, insurance is covering the smart contract risk and reducing some of the other DeFi risks. But it's still fully backed by the underlying thing. Could be the same thing for DAI. We think that some people might already be used to using a particular stablecoin, and that might be something they're already comfortable with. Whether it's like, DAI is the decentralized, over collateralized with Bitcoin and Ethereum and other things, stablecoin, or USDC, which is fully collateralized with the cash reserves and cash equivalents. We believe that there's a a group of people that are just already used to a single stablecoin, or already comfortable with it, and they might want to use an RToken that's very similar to what they're used to already. Another one which is similar is what we've been thinking of as like insured tether, right? And so this one similarly could be Aave and compound versions of USDT. But in this case, given general market sentiment, I think I'll be the first to say I don't know or have a strong view on Tether and the cash reserves. But I do know that generally there are people that are less comfortable with it. I think they do have less transparency, and so as a result, maybe the revenue split here would be a higher split to the insurance pool. Maybe 2/3 goes to the insurance pool and 1/3 goes to the RToken holders. But what's interesting about this is that Tether is, at the end of the day, one of the largest stablecoins in the market. It's got some of the deepest liquidity, both in centralized exchanges and in DeFi. And also it's got higher lending rates in DeFi typically. Because of people being less comfortable with it, at the end of the day, there are higher people are paid more for it to supply it as collateral and hold that. And so it's interesting because there's this now in the case of any DPEG where USDT is no longer as valuable as the target unit, whether that's in this case the dollar. Then in that case, the insurance pool might have to step in, and part of it would be slashed and would go to the USD, the insured tether holders, to make up that difference in the depegging. And so, again, because this has happened more frequently in the past, we think that, in this case, a higher portion of the revenue would need to go to the insurance pool to make up for that risk.
I have a thought on that, Thomas. Can I add a thought on that? So, as a thought experiment, you can kind of imagine a version of insured USDT, which actually doesn't appreciate at all. So it could be that the R token itself gets zero of the revenue. It's just one insured USDT is always worth one USDT. And then the only difference is that if USDT depegs, as long as the depegging is less than the total insurance pool, like let's say the insurance pool is 30% of the value of the stablecoin, then as long as the DPEG doesn't go below 70 cents, then the R token would just automatically replace the USDT collateral with, say, I don't know, USDC, maybe would be a natural choice. So then it would mean that, like, as a crypto user, you could use this token, which basically is equivalent to USDT. But then, if a DPEG happens, like while you're sleeping or something, or while you're just not paying attention to crypto for a week, then your capital would be automatically transitioned to USDC. And I think that the hypothetical, and I don't really know if this is feasible, but the hypothetical where this could be the most interesting is if exchanges were to actually treat insured USDT as being equivalent to normal USDT. I kind of don't think they would, but if they did, this would be really cool because you could, let's say you had a USDT balance on an exchange and you go to withdraw. In the same way as you have the choice to withdraw like ERC20 or, Binance Smart Chain or Tron or whatever for USDT, if one of the options were, the insured USDT on whatever chain, then you could withdraw and, go put it into DeFi or whatever, have it in your wallet and just have the insurance mechanism baked in. And then similarly, you could go back and deposit to the same or a different exchange. And the beauty there is when you deposit, you then just have a USDT balance, just a normal USDT balance. And what's so interesting about that is that, like as Thomas was saying, USDT is like, I think it's still maybe the most liquid stablecoin on all top exchanges. And so that means that, it's very desirable to be able to deposit it and go buy whatever other token you're interested in. So yeah, that's kind of like a weird and unpredicted application of the RToken framework. That it's not like we built it to create insured USDT, but it could be something interesting that people might want.
That's exactly right. Highlighting the cool flexibility that's baked in.
Yeah.
One thing we've been really focused on stablecoins, and again, that was kind of the one of the initial goals of the platform. But Nevin was mentioning a bit earlier. There could be, or rather, we've been focused on things that are pegged to $1. But these could be pegged to the target unit. Could be euros. It could be gold. It could be. It could even be Ethereum. Or a combination of all those things, kind of like an index fund, not exactly, but there's another version of an R token which could be partially pegged to Ethereum, partially pegged to dollars, partially pegged to euros, partially pegged to wrap Bitcoin, etc. And folks could think of it as a more long-term store of wealth. I think. This week in particular, people might be thinking that Ethereum and Bitcoin are not good long-term stores of, or rather short-term stores of wealth. But these are things that are possible with the platform. I guess last thing before we jump to questions, Nevin highlighted this, but we are actively looking to speak with people that are interested in deploying our tokens. At the end of the day, the Reserve Protocol is a platform, and platforms become successful when other folks use them. And so we want to talk to folks and talk to them about like what kind of parameters their R token that they have in mind might have. Help them do that. We are creating we commissioned an interface for deploying our tokens. But like anything that is a bit complex, there are some things we expect that will be able to answer any questions that people might have as they're going through that process. So we'd love to speak to anyone that's interested in it. Definitely post your thoughts in the RToken brainstorm channel, and we can start discuss it there. Go into DM if helpful, etc. But yeah, we'd love to speak to anyone, and if anyone has ideas on folks that would want to deploy our token, same thing. We'd love to speak to them. With that, Sinatra, are there any questions that we should jump to? I haven't been looking at the general chat here as I've been monologuing.
Yeah, is it okay if I start on this, Thomas?
Yeah, go for it.
So, I mean, first off, yeah, we do not plan to have any sort of gating mechanism or any sort of approval process. And so, so the simple starting answer is like we do not plan to stop bad actors or people who don't know what they're doing from creating our tokens. And so you have to expect that will happen. So I think we should all expect that will happen as long as the platform gets popular.
And
And
just
so,
to add there, it's
yeah,
kind of similar from any ERC20 token, right? Where like we've seen countless examples over the last year of people launching like meme coins, right? And so yeah, so it'll be similar, fully permissionless in that sense. But
I think
yeah,
that's a really good comparison. It's like if you look at Ethereum, is Ethereum used to create scams or is it used to implement bad ideas? Obviously, yes. And so, even like I actually don't have like a great example in mind, but even like Uniswap, right? It's like people use Uniswap, in like early DeFi farming, and then they pull the liquidity, right? Like that's where like the rug pull sort of originated, if I understand correctly.
Yep.
And so, and people post scam tokens on Uniswap, and and there's just all sorts of things that you can buy on Uniswap that are, a bad idea to buy. And yet, there is a way in which like the cream rises to the top, both with Ethereum and Uniswap. I mean, not entirely. And I would say that probably, with the Ethereum example, Ethereum probably gets a lot of bad PR for, the sketchy things that have been created, for the things that were bad ideas, etc. But at the same time, you have this like fully open exploration. And so the sheer volume of good stuff or cool stuff or interesting stuff that's also been created, I think has made it totally worth it. So that like philosophically, I think that's one answer. However, that's not to say that we shouldn't, as a community, think about how to try to guide people away from choosing to use things that they don't understand that are going to hurt them, right? Obviously, I was highly outspoken early on about the dangers of algorithmic stablecoins, and again recently with the collapse of UST, I would hate to see an R token that's backed by something like that get really popular just because of the yield and then hurt a bunch of people. That's not what I'm in it for. And I do think that there are things that we could do to prevent that. I think that they're similar to like the things that we could do within the reserve ecosystem are sort of similar to, in my mind, what we can do in the broader like crypto and stablecoin ecosystem. An idea that I'm personally excited about is creating, something like a stablecoin like rating website, or rating agency, if you will, kind of like the S&P that rates bonds. You have ratings like AAA, AA, etc., and there's like a methodology behind that. I think if there were an independent organization that did that for stablecoins generally, including R tokens, that would be great, and it's something that I'm hoping to help get off the ground. And so I think that sort of thing, combined with if we can get exchanges and wallets to actually showcase that information, that can help people make a decision about what to purchase, what to hold. Certainly, one thing that we'll have more influence over, maybe not perfectly direct influence, but some more influence over, is if people make UIs in the reserve ecosystem, like the one that we're initially commissioning, or others that people choose to make. I think those are natural places to disseminate information about what is risky and not risky, what's endorsed by certain parties, or at least sort of like information about the type of thing that you would be buying or holding. I think there's a lot that can be done to help people understand. And then just lastly, and then I'll shut up, like on the branding question of what happens if something gets big, and then it blows up and there's negative headlines about reserve, I do think that that's a real risk. And I think one partial mitigating factor is basically, I think it makes sense for RTokens to each have their own name and brand that doesn't include the word reserve in it, or the reserve logo or reserve branding. And so this is what I think we should encourage in the reserve community when launching RTokens. And the thing is, if you create an RToken that, for example, let's take the example that Thomas talked about of USD Plus. Let's say one of you guys decided to deploy an RToken that was like USD Plus, and let's say you wanted to call it USD Plus. That's a name that's, I think, a great name in terms of informing the user what that RToken is meant to do. It's meant to be USD, but with growth, and it doesn't borrow from reserve. And so initially, that might make it a little bit harder for that token to gain traction because maybe reserve has a little bit of brand equity. But I actually think that also from the perspective of an RToken creator, there's power in having a novel, unique brand. And let me try to convince you of that. So, like, what's the best example? It's like, there's let's look at OUSD, the origin dollar. So there's this thing called the origin dollar, which is actually kind of similar to USD Plus in how it works. It wraps these yield-bearing stablecoin assets, and they get rebalanced, and so you have a stablecoin that generates yield. Now, the origin dollar is in one sense, it's a highly informative name. Okay, this is like a dollar-denominated thing created by the Origin team. And you might know of the Origin project, the OGN token, and so it inherits some amount of brand equity. It also is the case that if OUSD, if the Origin dollar gets really popular, maybe that will help improve the Origin brand. Maybe that will cause the OGN token to appreciate because people will find out about the project or something. But at the same time, to me, when I hear the Origin dollar, it kind of makes me feel like, okay, that's just like the Origin team trying to promote the Origin project. It's not really, it doesn't really feel like the name is meant for me to understand what it is, and it doesn't really feel like a standalone thing in the way that USD Plus does, right? So you can imagine a token that's like the reserve yield dollar or something. That feels more like it feels more territorial. It feels more like, we're trying to promote reserve through the release of this asset and the popularization of this asset. Whereas USD Plus, it's like, okay, like that's just like, it's its own thing. It has its own identity. It has its own meaning. It stands on its own. And so I actually think that both for the sake of RTokens having the right reception and sort of having their own identity, which I think can be powerful and positive, and because in the case that if they fail, then they also don't bring the reserve brand down with them quite as much. I think it's ideal for RTokens to have an independent name, an independent brand and identity, independent logo and color scheme, and so on. I think that it should be this, and I think a good analogy is ERC20 tokens, right? It's not like every token that we make on Ethereum is like, the Ethereum this token and the Ethereum that token. No, they all have their completely own identity and branding and so on. And I think that that's what we should encourage for our tokens as well. You want to take that one,
So
Thomas?
yeah, sure. So I think you're exactly right. This is very related. A key component is going to be education and analysis of various different art tokens. And so there, the team that we commissioned to create the application to start, they will be working with various art token deployers before listing things on the platform. And then, I think that this is something that we have to figure out, though, is how do we surface all the various analysis that folks in the community do. And, whether this is the governance forum or whether this lives in documentation, wherever it is, I think it's going to be quite critical to surface different analysis of different art tokens and, how they might function in various different scenarios and what the risks of them might be, et cetera. And, I think Nevin mentioned this already, but some kind of like ratings group or agency or something like that is something that we think could be very valuable. And so as they're, on the Explorer trying to figure out where to stake their RSR, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to create some kind of resource that they'll be able to go to figure out exactly which one they might want to stake on and what the various risks might be, what the yield might be, et cetera. We'll be able to show historical yield and like expected yield. And then, we'll want to make sure that we can also highlight, and whether this is the RToken deployer, highlighting something like, what we're calling the constitution of the RToken, or, some of the documented risks, et cetera. We need to figure that out. But I think it'll be similar to how CoinMarketCap, for instance, lists different aspects of coins that they include on their platform and highlights different risks, highlights different strengths, et cetera. We'll want to do something similar.
And in terms of like the basics, the initial UI that's been commissioned, if I understand right, it will include all of the concrete information about any given R token. So you can click on an R token and you can see exactly the breakdown of the backing. You can also see like the backup tokens, the backup collateral assets that would be switched to in the case of a default. You can see the amount of RSR that's currently staked on it. So you can see sort of, would you be like a large portion of the staking pool, or would you just be a small portion? And so like, as you were saying, Thomas, it's like that doesn't really necessarily give like deep analysis. It's like those are just kind of all the bare facts being like transparently disclosed, and then you can sit there and think about those facts and be like, okay, how do I feel about these collateral assets or these collateral assets? If you look at an R token and you're like, that's backed by a bunch of exotic stuff that I've never heard of, well then, that might be a risky thing. It might be totally safe, but you just don't know what those collateral assets are. And that's kind of where the room for that like analysis or rating or whatever might come into play, so that you don't necessarily have to go and research every single thing, on your own. But then obviously, it's like there's, rating agencies are occasionally wrong. Famously in the 2008 crisis, there's a bunch of bonds that were rated highly and they turned out to be terrible. And so we kind of you should have the same sort of level of skepticism when relying on a rating agency in this case. But still, I do think that practically speaking, there probably can be information sharing that makes it so the community can like analyze things kind of together as a group, not necessarily every single person having to go and research every underlying collateral asset themselves.
That's exactly right. And only additional thing to add there is that we'll be able to show like exactly what's happened in the past for that art token. So like in addition to the facts, we'll be able to show where is this art token being used, and also like how has income been shared, et cetera. Like what are the protocol actions that have been happening in a very transparent way.
Yeah. There's one more thing I want to add in actually, because Thomas mentioned us listing our tokens, or the at least the people who are running that UI listing them. So the thing is, like, anyone can create an R token. The way that this initial explorer, we're calling it, would work, it's a little bit analogous to Etherscan for R tokens, is that it still has to be that the company that's running that explorer adds an R token, because, like, if you just go deploy a new R token contract on Ethereum, this website won't necessarily know about it by default. So if you deploy an R token, you'll be able to go and just submit a pull request on GitHub. And then once that pull request is merged in, then your R token will show up on that website. It'll be a pretty straightforward process, but it will be like a step that an R token deployer or any other community member will have to take before that R token shows up on that website. But I don't think the intention is to, like, only show the blue chip R tokens. I think the intention is to show, to show them generally speaking. It's just that, like, there will have to be a process to go and add them.
And also, sorry, only thing to add there is that it, just like Uniswap, like, even though Uniswap kind of like limits some things sometimes, anyone can interact with Uniswap, and it'll be the same for us. Anyone can interact with the protocol directly via the blockchain or from wherever. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that you unmuted, but I think maybe your microphone is not picking you up. Taylor, why don't you talk about some of those pictures?
I was going to say the same.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Hi, everybody. So on the RSR staking side, you do not have the ability to pause unstakings as the governor of an R token system. You do have the ability to upgrade any of the individual contracts, which means always the ability to do anything. But that is gated behind the governance process. So depending on how you set your parameters, that could be 1 to 2 weeks. On the R token side, we do have this notion of a one-shot pauser. So it could be the case that due to some unforeseen circumstance, redemptions of R token could potentially be dangerous to a particular deployment, especially early on in the system, when we're a little less sure of its stability and robustness. So early on then, there's this one-shot pauser role, which I think we're currently planning to set to a length of 10 days. And basically, this can only be used once. One-shot is a term from game theory referring to the idea that this can only be used once and then the power is lost. So this is very much like an emergency backstop procedure. And always in the future, you can change this one-shot pauser role to be the 0 address once you want to turn this off. So yeah, that's some background on the ability you do not have the ability to stop the RSR and stakings except to do a general upgrade. You do have the ability to instantly pause a R token issuance and redemption for something like 10 days, though this is up to you to how you set the parameter in your R token, and that can only happen once.
And Taylor, if I understand correctly, that's like the pauser role can be set to any particular address. It could be like a multi-sig or something. It's not necessarily the same as the person who deployed it, but the deployer could set it as themselves if they wanted to initially, right?
That's right. Yep.
And this is actually a common design that we've seen in other places in DeFi as well. For folks that are familiar with Curve, it's very permissionless, it's very decentralized, but they do have the concept of the emergency DAO, which is like a multi-sig of, I think it's 6 people, but don't quote me on that. They can step in and stop things that they think will. It's like, highly participated community members, respected community members, etc., that can step in and change certain things at certain times. And so this is, at the end of the day, these systems are complex, and we do anticipate that there might be the need for this. But yeah, we can add, it can be a multi-sig, it could be a DAO, etc., that would be able to pause this in one shot.
Taylor, that reminds me of another question I have that you might be able to answer. So for context, like the purpose that we had in thinking of this pauser role was basically if a smart contract bug is discovered and that bug could be exploited through issuance or redemption. And so it makes sense to pause before disclosing the bug in order to then publicly discuss a governance upgrade that would have to be carried out in order to fully fix the bug. But it raises a question. The Celsius metaphor, I think, is an interesting one. It raises a question, which is let's say that an RToken ends up with, let's say that a collateral asset were to default, which again, for most RTokens, we think is actually highly unlikely, but it could happen. That's the whole point of the insurance mechanism. So let's say an RToken collateral asset defaults, and then let's say that I guess there's a couple cases. One is the gears just haven't turned yet, let's say that the RToken is only 90% backed, and RSR will be seized and sold to make up the difference, but that hasn't happened yet. If somebody redeems when there's only that 90% backing, what do they get? Do they get 90% of the value, or do they get 100% of the value, such that you could have a bank run dynamic in that circumstance? I think that'd be an interesting thing to talk about, Taylor. And then the second question is, what happens if even after all of the insurance pool is spent, let's say the entire insurance pool was exhausted, if you at that point only have 90% of the value, then what happens?
Yep, got it. So 2 very good questions. So taking the first one. So there is this period right after either a basket is swapped or collateral defaults and this forces a basket to be swapped, where redemption of that RToken is actually worth less. And this is specifically because we want to discourage the bank run scenario. So if you're market making the RToken and USDT is in there and USDT has defaulted, then you will have this, and let's say the basket is swapped from USDT to USDC, right? Then there's this moment actually where if you go to redeem the RToken, it doesn't have any USDC yet. And let's pretend there was no USDC as another collateral, even though that'd be kind of silly. So at that moment, if you were to redeem your RToken, you would actually get nothing for the collateral of USDC because you have all that value currently stored in the USDT form and it's being swapped out to USDC. So there's this period where the redemption is worth less, and we actually think that's necessary in order to prevent the bank run scenario. Basically, the bank run, let's consider the alternative for a second. In the bank run scenario, you credit people with some of that USDT, but you're not really sure the price, or if you have some USDC to hand out, and you hand that out to people at the rate you expect to be able to make the entire group of RToken holders whole at in the future, you might just be wrong. Once you liquidate all that USDT for USDC, you might end up with less than you expected. And basically that is the bank run scenario you run into.
So basically, so if I understand, it's basically people have to wait for a little while until the auctions occur, until things are recapitalized. And so there might be a period of a couple of days where if you were to redeem right then, you would get less. But everybody will know, if you just look at the size of the insurance pool and it's sufficient, everyone will know, oh yeah, within a couple of days, this is exactly what the redeemability would be. And so everyone would be happy just waiting and letting that process play out, right? That's the idea?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can view our system. Yeah, go for it.
It could be hours, days, depending on the amount of collateral that needs to be auctioned.
Yes. Although I don't expect it to have to be much more than a day in, even an extreme case. Mhm. All right, so part 2
And
here.
then, part 2, yeah.
Yeah, so part 2, so this is, obviously a really unfortunate circumstance, not one that we ever want to run into. But let's take the example of, Thomas, you want to say something real quick?
No, sorry, I
Okay.
was smiling.
So this is the example where you've actually had such a large default of collateral that you seized all the staked RSR and you sold it all off, right? And after selling all of it, you're actually still short some collateral in order to make RToken holders whole. So you don't want to run into this circumstance, okay? But you can. And if you do run into it, you actually want to be able to. Let me make an analogy real quick. This is like very similar to, MakerDAO global settlement almost, right? This is actually, okay, things are about to become, we're about to not be able to make whole on our promises, and we have to sacrifice something. And sort of it's actually required in order for the system to continue functioning. And I guess in that respect, it doesn't really look like the MakerDAO global settlement. But anyway, what happens here is instead of basically this allows an RToken to continue functioning once the bad debt is eliminated. And the way this works is you wipe out all the RSR insurance, and then RToken holders will actually take a loss at this point. So maybe some new RSR stakers have decided to stake since the default happened, but probably not because they know their insurance is going to be taken. All of the RSR that is staked gets taken and sold for the missing collateral. If that reaches the recapitalization point, then this is the happy path. And in the unfortunate case where you've sold all the RSR and you still have not made up the entire set of the backing that you need in order to make all RToken holders whole at the current basket, then in this instance, the RToken holders actually take some percentage loss. So we call this the haircut. And this is, it's sort of like a tranche structure, right? So the RSR staking pool goes first. They pay out as much as they can. If that's not enough, then the RToken holders themselves take the loss. And this is necessary. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think it totally makes sense.
Nevin kick in. Yeah, it's necessary because if you think about the RSR, think about that particular RToken. If you ever want it to have insurance again, right, then you actually need to eliminate the debt. If you keep the debt there, then no one is going to stake. So this is actually what allows each individual RToken to sort of resurrect itself from some wipeout event. And it also means that for each RToken instance, one RToken being wiped out, yes, it might have some downward price pressure on RSR, but everything is sort of able to return to its normal functioning afterwards without like a hyperinflation event of the supply, like in Luna's case, for example.
Right, exactly. And it's like, even if, like, let's say that you ended up with 95% the value that you wanted for the backing. So, like, let's just say that the RToken was supposed to be worth $1 and it's only worth 95 cents because of the haircut. It's like you only have 95 cents worth of backing per RToken. You could get a bank run, right? Even though it's only 5% under collateralized. If everyone starts to think that everyone else is going to redeem, then everyone keeps rushing to redeem because you can tell that if you're in the last 5%, you would get nothing. And so by just devaluing the RToken, saying, nope, everyone who redeems gets 95 cents instead of $1, then there's no bank run scenario. There's no possibility of anyone being left holding the bag and not getting any value. Everyone shares that hit. And then just to reiterate, like, the whole design of this system is meant to make this extremely unlikely. So we're not really talking about a likely scenario, but I think this is a cool window into like some of the types of things that we've had to spend a lot of time thinking about, even though they're really unlikely scenarios. Is like, you want to make sure that all these dynamics play out in the optimal possible way, in part so that if it ever does happen, then people don't get screwed. But also, having these dynamics of these edge cases worked out makes the main case actually, I think, in many cases more stable, because people can think this through and realize what's going to happen and not have to worry about like a bank run, for example. And so I think concretely, over the next, say, 5 years, it could be that we actually do see this code executed some number of times, maybe we do actually find ourselves in this scenario. If so, it's by far the most likely that that's because someone created a really sketchy R token with like a questionable collateral backing. If you create an R token that has multiple algorithmic stablecoins as the backing, for example, then maybe that's where we actually get to see these mechanisms tested in practice. I think it's very unlikely that we'll see it tested in practice with anything that's created with the sort of conservative mindset that our team has. So anyway, that's kind of our take on that. I'm going to need to jump off. I have to prepare for our internal team sync that's starting in half an hour. But I don't want to crash the party. So you guys should keep going if there are more questions.
Yeah, happy to keep going.
Okay, cool, awesome. This is great. I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, okay. I can take this. Thomas, you want to go for it?
No, go for it.
So let's see. Actually, if you want to set the stage here, and then I can talk about some of the details.
Sure. Yeah, so when you define an R token, you do a couple things. You define the name, etc. You also define what is the main basket of collateral, but you also define an emergency basket, and these are the backup collaterals that the protocol would turn to in the case of defaults to refill or recapitalize the collateral basket for our token holders. And so at a high level, it's fairly simple. There's a primary basket, and then there's an emergency collateral basket. And governance will have some flexibility to define like exactly how that emergency basket is used. But yeah, that's the basics. Taylor, you want to dive into a bit more of the details?
Yeah, so Thomas is referring here to the automated system for selecting backups that we have in place. There are two ways that backups can occur. So one, automatically through this backup configuration, where a collateral formally becomes defaulted due to its prices changing on markets, and the protocol automatically swaps in a new collateral. It automatically selects a new collateral that has the same target unit, and actually it selects some set of collaterals because it's not really sure, wants to diversify the risk, and then replaces the defaulted collateral with some number of good backup collaterals. The other thing that can happen is you can have a collateral, you can actually end up in a situation where all the collateral for a target unit has defaulted. Okay, so let's take the case where you have a Euro USD stablecoin. So it's half Euro, half USD. I'm referring here to the target unit and target amounts. So 0.5 of a Euro, 0.5 of a USD. And I don't actually know what the state of your stablecoin is on chain is right now. I think there's only one, and it's very small. So let's say that the backup configuration is just this one stablecoin, and this one stablecoin defaults, right? In this instance, the protocol would actually enter this halted state. This particular R token would enter a halt for issuance, redemption, and all trading until governance comes in and sets a new basket, right? And this is sort of a situation that was not planned for, right? There's no collateral that was set as backup for this Euro stablecoin, and that's an indicator that you actually need active human intervention rather than like an automated machine solution that could happen on a timescale much faster than what governance can act on. And then only one other detail to add here. this sort of deals with a game theory concern around withdrawing your RSR. So as soon as a R token has a collateral that defaults, RSR stakers basically know they're going to take this loss, at least the RSR stakers on that particular R token. You don't want them to unstake ahead of this action. So something that is true in our protocol is that as soon as a default is beginning to happen, right? So from the moment that we plausibly could be detecting it, there is some depegging of some fiat coin in the oracles, we disallow unstaking of RSR, of STRSR. And if the basket formally defaults, we continue enforcing that lock. So stakers are locked into the staking pool in order to, avoid giving them the option of bailing on making whole on their promise to the R token holders. So that was the one other thing, and that's important because in this situation where you do have this complete, there are no more valid baskets that the protocol can automatically select, all the collateral for some target unit has defaulted case, this actually guarantees that governance will actually step in and come up with a solution rather than just running away, right?
Mhm. Sure. So it actually depends. And this is where we'll want to work closely with folks that want to deploy our tokens to make sure that things are configured properly. But if the target unit, so let's see, let's think about the ETF version first, and then the second version. I'll just explain how it might work. But for the ETF version, say 50% of the basket was Ethereum and targeted at Ethereum and collateralized with Ethereum, and the second 50% was targeted at $1 targeted at $1 and backed by dollar collateral types. In that case, if the price of Ethereum goes up 50%, roughly, then oh gosh, we're pushing my mental math limits here. But then 50% of the basket would be 50% more valuable. And so overall, I think that would mean that the token is, I guess, 25% more valuable. And so, yeah, so that's how it would work in the ETF style. The other version, though, which is probably not good, but maybe might be good in certain situations, would be if the entire basket, the target price was $1 for all of it, but part of the collateral is backed by Ethereum. In that case, the appreciation would be income for the R token holders and for the insurance pool, depending on what the defined split was between those two groups. But it's important to highlight in this case that if the price of Ethereum goes down, that the insurance pool would be slashed to make up for the difference for the R token holders. And so that's why I say it's like potentially ill-advised, although there might be certain situations where it might make sense in the long term for certain types of assets to have more volatile assets be the collateral, even though the target unit is something that's a bit more stable. But yeah, those are kind of the two different examples. Taylor, was that did I hit that? Is there anything else to add there?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this release of the protocol is a bit more limited, and you alluded to this. It's limited in one particular way, which is if your collateral can go both up and down with respect to its target unit, then the protocol is not economically coherent. So what does that mean? So this ETH USD case, for example. So if your target unit is USD, and your collateral is, say, CETH, so this is compound ETH, then in that instance, sometimes ETH can go down with respect to USD, right? So what would happen in that instance? Well, we'd go seize some RSR from the insurance pool and sell it for ETH. Okay, so what happens when ETH goes up? Well, when ETH goes up, we're going to take CETH, we'll take some of that CETH and we will sell it for one part RToken to cause RToken appreciation and one part RSR in order to give revenue to the staking pool. So you can see when ETH goes down relative to USD, just the stakers take the loss, right? But when ETH goes up, stakers take some gain and RToken holders take a gain. So basically, if you imagine this like sinusoidal, just goes up and down market behavior, that actually just like pumps value out of the insurance pool over time and empties it entirely. So this version of the protocol, because it has this stark notion of what it means for something to default, you can't have collateral that goes down with respect to its target unit. So taking the case of CETH, you could have CETH as a collateral against the target unit of ETH, and you could not have CETH as collateral against the target unit of USD. Interestingly, I actually just wrote the collateral plugin contract yesterday for CETH. So we will have some initial presets that people can use there if they want to have some fraction of their basket in a volatile crypto. And I'm guessing it's probably a little bit confusing to people what it means. How can you still have, like, what does it feel like to still have ETH in the basket, given that it can't be against USD? You can basically just think of like, it's almost like you have two separate coins. You can just imagine you have one token that is, everything that other than the CETH backing. And then you have, actually, this is maybe not a good way to explain this. Okay, I'll save this for another time. But yeah, I'll leave that there, Thomas.
Yeah, so we've had some conversations with a few different folks. I think what is helpful to highlight is the benefits for them, right? And so if someone wants to deploy a fully collateralized yield-bearing insured stable currency, they don't need to do a lot of the hard work that goes into supporting a currency like that, and figuring out all the smart contracts, et cetera. They can use the protocol that that we've been built and are getting ready to launch, that has all of that baked in, right? And so just like any other software product, right? It will this platform is going to give folks a lot of control and a lot of flexibility over the types of RToken products that they'd like to launch, without them having to do some of the heavy lifting on defining some of the protocol automation, et cetera, that manages the collateral, shares the revenue between the insurance pool and the RToken holders, et cetera. Handles different default scenarios. All that stuff's automatically baked in, and so we see this as like super valuable for folks that do want to deploy RTokens. An additional benefit would be like the Explorer that we already commissioned to be built, that can display a variety of different things about the RTokens, allow people to mint and redeem, et cetera. And so we see that as all those different things and many more that I didn't mention as big benefits to folks that would want to deploy an a stable yield-bearing insured currency without doing all that.